we will begin PCOS today. And again, as per our custom, we will first start off with understanding a little bit more about the human physiology when it comes to the menstrual cycle, and then we will go into understanding what disease physiology looks like. Okay. So, welcome to the lecture on polycystic ovarian syndrome. First, we are going to understand more about the female reproductive system. All right. And can I have all of your cameras on, please? First of all, the major parts of the female reproductive system are one is the ovaries. These are the female gonads, which contains follicles that releases an oocyte during the menstrual cycle. We'll understand all of these terms in more detail. So just like males have testicles, which are the male gonads, the same way females have ovaries, which are the female gonads. Gonads meaning sex organs, right? They are the sex organs, and they contain follicles, these egg-like looking things. They have been labeled as ovaries. There are two in every female, and they contain follicles, and these follicles can release something called an oocyte during every menstrual cycle. Fallopian tubes. So the purpose of the fallopian tubes is just to serve as a transporter of whatever the ovaries are releasing, the oocytes that are released by the ovaries, and they need to be transported into the uterus over here, where this is the place where pregnancy usually occurs. Now, what is the uterus? If fertilization occurs, that is, if the sperm does end up entering the oocyte and actually becoming one with the oocyte, then you will get an embryo. You will get a growing embryo that will be implanted in the uterus for further growth. So that is the muscular canal which every female has for which serves as an entrance, and it is approximately 10 centimeters long. The follicle, they are small fluid filled sacs which are found inside the ovary. So if you were to take this ovary over here and cut it into half, if you were to take a cross section of the ovary, what you will see is something like this. So there, what are these follicles? Inside the ovaries, there are these small fluid filled sacs which are present. So there are multiple follicles that are present. You can see these small tiny dots over here, primary follicles, egg nest. Females contain multiple follicles, and usually in each and every cycle, multiple follicles out of these population of follicles, it tries to mature into an egg. Okay, and each and every follicle has the capacity to be able to mature into an egg, to actually mature and release an egg. It will not mature into an egg itself. Inside the follicle, an ovum or the egg will develop, which if it gets fertilized by the male sperm, it will lead to childbirth. Okay, when females are born, they are born by default with millions of follicles. But by the time they reach puberty, only 40,000 follicles remain. The diagram depicts the life cycle of a follicle inside an ovary. Usually, this is what the life cycle of a follicle is. Once it has become completely mature, once it has become a mature follicle, it will release the ovum into the fallopian tube. You remember how this is connected to the fallopian tube, right? So whatever the ovaries release, they will go directly into your fallopian tube. The follicle still is useful even after the ovum gets released. So after the ovum gets released or the egg gets released, you can see that the follicle then degenerates into this thing called corpus luteum, and we will understand the role of the corpus luteum later. And it further keeps degrading into the corpus albicans, and then it just dissolves later. Then it disappears after a while. This process of releasing the ovum from the follicle, that is called ovulation. Okay, so what is an oocyte? The cell which develops inside the follicle, this yellowish mass, that is called the oocyte. The oocyte matures into the ovum. So we can say that up until here, we will call it the oocyte, up until it is the tertiary, up until it doesn't become the mature follicle, it is an oocyte. Once it matures, it has become an ovum. And the ovum is also known as an egg. Ovulation is the release of the ovum. So when the ovum gets released into the fallopian tube, that is called ovulation. So the mature follicle ruptures, it quite literally blasts open, and it releases the ovum into the fallopian tube. Now that you have understood this basic thing, let's understand how this works along with the menstrual cycle. Why is it important to understand the menstrual cycle? Okay, there are many symptoms of PCOS that are linked with the menstrual cycle, and you will see certain abnormalities in the menstrual cycle. But for you to be able to spot these abnormalities, you need to understand what is a normal menstrual cycle, right? That's the approach which I usually take when I'm teaching any bit of human physiology. I first try to show you what is normal physiology like, and then we go into what is diseased physiology like. So once puberty, I would say the more accurate statement here is that the menstrual cycle begins when a girl enters puberty and becomes a woman. That's what we can say. What is puberty? Puberty is the life stage when a boy or girl starts developing secondary sexual characteristics, which are a sign of sexual maturity. Signs of puberty in females include the development of breasts and menarche. What is menarche? Once you become a teenager, that's usually when you have your menarche. Menopause is the stage at which a woman stops having the menstrual cycle between 45 to 55 years of age. This is, of course, what the average is, but there are going to be exceptions to the rule as well. So what is the main purpose of the menstrual cycle? It is to prepare a female for pregnancy. Most of the hormonal changes and their effects are aimed at this particular goal itself. So now we're going to learn about the diagnosis of PCOS. How exactly is PCOS diagnosed? PCOS is the most common hormonal disorder in females of reproductive age and affects between 3.7 to 22.5% of all women overall in India. Basically, like saying that it affects between 4 to 23 women out of every 100 women in India. But you might have noticed that it is becoming more and more common as the years pass. So the diagnosis of PCOS is based on the presence of at least two of the following three criteria. Now, these three criteria are also called the Rotterdam criteria. This method of diagnosing someone with PCOS is called the Rotterdam criteria. First is chronic anovulation. Second is hyperandrogenism. Third is polycystic ovaries. Now, to understand all of these things, you need to understand normal human physiology, which we already have done so. Okay. So, diagnosing PCOS in adolescents, okay, adolescents meaning your teenagers basically. So, diagnosing PCOS in adolescents is challenging as many PCOS symptoms are common in normal puberty. Okay. For example, acne, menstrual irregularities, hyperinsulinemia. So, many of the symptoms which you would commonly use to diagnose a female with PCOS, when you have just experienced menarche, when a female has just started her menstrual cycle and is in the early years of her menstrual cycles, that time many of these symptoms are actually common. Okay, and that does not necessarily mean that something is wrong with the female. Okay, still you can look into them, but don't jump to the conclusion that, oh, my daughter or my niece automatically has PCOS, my teenager niece has PCOS. Okay. So now how do you exactly diagnose chronic anovulation? We know what is ovulation so far. When the mature follicle ruptures and releases the ovum into the fallopian tube, you call it ovulation. So anovulation meaning that ovulation is not happening. Now within anovulation also there are two: chronic anovulation and oligo-ovulation. First, let's look at what is chronic. So now this automatically, just we don't even need the definition. Looking at this only we can see that ovulation has not been happening for a long period of time. So chronic anovulation meaning that only. It is the complete absence of ovulation and a cycle length of more than 35 days suggests chronic anovulation. So which means that the cycle is overall lasting for more than 35 days. Okay. And this also leads to amenorrhea, when you have no menstrual periods for 3 or more consecutive months, meaning continuously for 3 or more months you don't have any periods at all. That would be called amenorrhea. Okay, that would be called amenorrhea. So this is an observable symptom. You would be able to see. You would be able to see this in your clients, and you would be able to ask them that okay, if you're skipping your periods, when is the last time you had your periods, and how long have you not been on your periods? How long have you not had any periods? Oligo-ovulation. Oligo-ovulation is just a small variation of chronic anovulation. Oligo-ovulation is when ovulation is irregular but not absent. It is called oligo-ovulation. If you're having fewer than 9 menstruations in a year, then that would be called oligomenorrhea. Okay. Obviously, a direct consequence of this is going to be a reduction in fertility, right? A direct consequence of this is going to be a reduction in fertility. So one of the most common complaints over here is going to be that I am not able to conceive because, and the reason could be over here that if the egg is only not present, egg itself is not present, what is the sperm going to go and merge with, right? So that is why there is no fertility over here. Is anovulation and oligo-ovulation clear for all of you? This is clear. Explanation was simple, easy to understand. Okay. Anyone who's not understood this particular thing? So moving to hyperandrogenism. Symptom number 2, hyperandrogenism. And that is divided into clinical or biochemical ways of categorizing hyperandrogenism. So what is hyperandrogenism? There are two types of hormones in the human body produced by both the sexes, both males and females produce both of them, which is androgens and estrogens. Okay, now you might think estrogens, plural. Isn't estrogen itself a hormone? No, estrogen is actually a category of hormone. So male sex hormones are called as androgens and female sex hormones are called estrogens. So hyperandrogenism, what is hyperandrogenism? It is a condition in which there is excessive androgen production in a female, meaning there is excessive male hormone production inside a female. How do you detect hyperandrogenism in females? There are two ways to do it. One, clinically speaking. Clinically meaning you are going to be looking at some physiological symptoms, some observable symptoms. Okay, that is called clinical hyperandrogenism. And then you have biochemically detecting hyperandrogenism as well. Okay, the first one is hirsutism. Okay, hirsutism refers to hyperandrogenism leads to virilization, which is a condition in which a woman starts developing masculine physical traits. Increase in muscle mass, decreased breast size, deepening of the voice. Hirsutism. What is hirsutism? It is one of the most common forms of virilization in women with PCOS, which is hirsutism, which is defined as an abnormal amount of dark or coarse hair that grows on a woman's face, chest, and back in a male-like pattern. Acne. What is acne? Acne is this particular condition when your hair follicles, they end up plugging with oil and dead skin cells. There is a high suspicion for hyperandrogenism in females in their mid-20s to 30s with persistent or exacerbated acne. Okay, so you might see this in female in mid-20s and mid-30 females, where they have a lot of acne on the face. This is also a symptom that they're having excessive male hormones inside the body. So the clinical part of hyperandrogenism is a way of detecting hyperandrogenism without doing the blood test necessary. So here you are actually looking at the symptom and you're saying that perhaps the symptom is because of excessive male hormones. Of course, you can't confirm it with this. Like you can't just say that because there's more hair or there's more hair, at least you can say, but acne, there can be multiple reasons, right? Many women get breakouts of acne because of eating certain stuff also. So it's not just, it can be seasonal as well. You can't just say that because the client has acne that she's definitely PCOS. Okay. In fact, even if she has acne because of high testosterone, you still can't say it is PCOS because you need to fulfill the diagnosis criteria.